Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Months of Senate tax reform work changes in a few days. The House passes a near $20 billion spending plan, and legislation to restart state executions heads to Governor McCrory. Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen. Thanks so much for watching Legislative Week in Review. House Republicans will say their second budget bill since taking power continues their work to reshape North Carolina. This new plan holds tax rates steady, prepares for tax reform, and has Democrats saying average North Carolinians will be the loser. The full House, and mostly Republicans, voted to pass a 2013 spending bill late this week. It calls for $19.6 billion in state spending the next fiscal year and $20.5 billion in 2014.
It's a matter of trying to fund everyone's wants. And the Republicans over here, we didn't get everything that we wanted because we didn't have the funds. Democrats, I'm sure, aren't getting everything that they want.
House budget writers say they have taken the Senate and McCrory administration's concerns to heart in writing this version of a budget. $200 million would boost the rainy day reserve funds, and another $200 million would renovate state buildings in disrepair.
It has overall growth of about 1.9% over the current spending. In the second year, we spend about 1% more than the Senate, 2% less than the governor. We're sailing down the middle of those proposals.
But House Democrats are very skeptical and critical. They say Republicans have acted with hypocrisy, placing policy decisions in a budget bill, a practice Republicans previously opposed.
I've seen things that you criticized us for when we were in power that you have already done, and because you did it, I guess it's all right, but it doesn't bless what we did in the same way.
Republican budget writers authorized school vouchers for private school tuition and provisions of the Senate-backed Excellent Schools Act in the budget bill. But Democrats say teachers will be suffering again under this Republican budget.
It cuts education in schools. It cuts teachers' assistants. Maybe not as much as it could, but it still does. Where are the priorities?
The community colleges and university system face further cuts in this House budget, but budget writers would allow them to raise tuition, the colleges in 2013, the university system in 2014. Republicans say overall K-12 public school spending will drop about 1% overall, but say teacher assistant jobs are saved from Senate budget cuts and classroom supply needs are fully funded.
We restored teaching assistants. We restored $95.5 million out of the governor's cut and $117.7 million of the Senate's cut for teaching assistants.
State employees and school teachers would receive 5 bonus vacation days for 2013 with some money set aside, about $160 million for 2014 pay increases if budget writers authorize it. The House debate inside the chamber on the budget bill was countered by a small protest outside the chamber doors. Protesters, led by the North Carolina NAACP, renewed their opposition to the Republican implementation of their promised political agenda.
Things like Medicaid came through sacrifice and suffering. Voting rights, sacrifice and suffering. Education, sacrifice and suffering. Unemployment benefits that finally came to black and brown people came through, and colored people came through sacrifice and suffering.
The House budget, which is the Senate's bill heavily modified, returns for a Senate review and expected negotiations between House and Senate budget leaders. Any final budget compromise will certainly be influenced by a tax structure overhaul. The House passed its tax reform plan early this week. It keeps the income tax system in place, lowers rates, and applies the sales tax to a few more services. But this is one of 2 tax reform visions we'll be covering this week. House Republicans were able to delay a final vote on the House Republican tax overhaul bill late last week, but they could not stop final passage early this week. Republicans say Democrats, over their decades of rule, left behind an outdated and ineffective tax structure that requires a strong state manufacturing economy, when North Carolina's economy these days is focused on services. Republicans believe it's time to flatten all income tax rates, slightly lower the sales tax rate, but apply it to slightly more services.
It's a bill that will make our state more competitive for job creation. It's a bill under which 2/3 of North Carolina's tax filers will see an average personal income tax reduction.
Wake County Democratic Representative Greer Martin says Democrats recognize the need for state income tax reform, but this particular bill focuses on supporting the wealthiest North Carolinians.
It's really just more of the same thing that I endured in my final 2 years here. Just more attempts to place the burdens on the working people and middle class of North Carolina at the benefit of the richest in our state.
Democratic Representative Nathan Baskerville accused the House Republicans of playing games with tax reform.
Telling a majority of North Carolinians that this proposal is going to lower their taxes, when in fact this tax plan is one of the biggest tax increases for most North Carolinians that we've ever seen.
Republicans say House Democrats are being somewhat untruthful about the tax structure overhaul legislation. Cumberland County Representative John Zoka reminded his colleagues that tax reductions put more money in ordinary people's pockets, money he says they'll spend to boost our economy.
Tax reform is not an event, it's a process. This is an awesome start to this process, building on the work of many others who've worked very hard and have fought this out to a great extent.
The House vote was 75-37 to send this legislation to the Senate, where leaders there have a different vision for changing the state's tax structure. Over in the Senate, it was focusing on its own tax reform ideas this week. It began with testimony from UNC system professors on why the current tax system isn't efficient. For all the debate, that is one point on which Republicans and Democrats agree. University system professors were invited by Mecklenburg County Senator Bob Rucho this week to testify about changing North Carolina's current tax system.
I want everyone to understand that comprehensive tax reform is the most important issue that the General Assembly will face regarding the long-term economic viability of the state and its people.
Whatever becomes of a final tax reform package, House and Senate leaders have agreed that income taxes should be flatter and lower. Sales taxes should be lower and maybe applied to more services currently untaxed, but that's not been politically popular. Critics say the poor will end up paying more taxes, and higher income brackets will see tax benefits under this particular tax overhaul. North Carolina State economist Dr. Mike Walden would not tell lawmakers what to do, but he says there is no escaping some effects of fundamentally changing state taxation.
Even if you do accept the notion that a broad base and a low rate is one that you want to aspire to, if you don't have a system that has that right now, then making changes is obviously going to perhaps advantage some and disadvantage others.
North Carolina State's Dr. Roby Sawyers explained North Carolina's current tax rates.
We do have high rates, both individual income tax and corporate income tax rates, compared to other states in the Southeast, although we're about average if you look nationally.
The Senate and House differ on how much to change our state's tax system. All rates could be lowered if tax deductions were eliminated. The debate places focus on the state's corporate income tax rate and the role of business tax credits and deductions that are supported by state law.
If you eliminated ineffective tax code-based incentives, you could reduce the corporate tax rate to a competitive level. So it wasn't that loose nail on your deck you always trip on. We're higher than our competition, and that was proving to be an unnecessary disadvantage, particularly when we could get rid of ineffective incentives and achieve a benefit that would accrue to many more firms.
Protecting the rights of property owners and advancing the cause of affordable home ownership.
Lobbying groups are attacking the Senate's tax overhaul legislation on the air as attacking middle-class tax deductions that are politically popular. House leaders and Governor Pat McCrory have supported more modest changes to the tax code in recent weeks than wholesale tax deduction elimination, a shift to consumption taxes, and dramatic income tax rate decreases. But Senate Republican leaders say now is the time to be bold and to not nibble around the edges of state tax policy. It appeared the Senate would be debating lowering all income tax rates, eliminating tax deductions, and using a much lowered sales tax that applied to all services not taxed. That did not happen this week. A new bill emerged with changes to make it more acceptable for the House and Governor. And that costed the support of one senator who worked over a year on tax reform policy. Throughout this 2013 legislative session, Senate work on a comprehensive tax overhaul bill largely focused on converting the current income tax-based state tax structure into a new system of lower rates and sales taxes on services currently untaxed. All of that changed this week as Senator Phil Berger presented a compromise plan that adopts positions supported by House leaders and the McCrory administration.
It will bring us to the point where the competition among states will be such that North Carolina will be in the forefront of states in the competition for jobs and in the competition for growth as the economy expands.
The Senate compromise, when fully implemented, would install a flat 5.25% personal income tax rate for all incomes. If you're a married tax filer filing jointly, you'd see your first $15,000 in income exempt from state income taxes, and if you're single, you'd get half that amount. The sales tax is unchanged practically. Services not currently sales taxed would not be taxed. That was a hallmark of earlier tax reform efforts, but the sales tax would apply to things like entertainment, tickets, movies. Businesses, nonprofits, and charities would begin paying sales taxes in a few years. Corporate income taxes would be eliminated. C corporations would pay a flat $5,000 fee. LLCs would pay a $750 fee. Mecklenburg County Senator Bob Rucho led the tax overhaul effort until this week. He now opposes this legislation as not being reformed any longer.
It takes care of about 80,000 corporations, and as Senator Clodfelter alluded to, there may be 200 of them or so that really pay the bulk of that taxes. Their tax liability is brought to zero, pretty close. But what happens to the 400,000 small businesses? Very limited help.
Democratic Senator Dan Clodfelter says the Senate compromise reinforces the outdated aspects of North Carolina's current tax code.
It doesn't address the sales tax in any comprehensive way. Senator Berger is quite correct. The sales tax we have today was designed for and structured to respond to the economy of the 1930s. This bill does not update that design.
Other Senate Democrats focused on the tax reform bill's possible taxation of Social Security benefits. The tax plan would tax retirement benefits if those benefits are taxed under federal income tax code. The AARP says it's still studying the issue.
But we do have some red flags when it comes to what the overall tax burden is going to be for people on Social Security, even with a zero tax bracket. But we wait to see what the analysis shows.
The Senate tax overhaul bill would reduce state tax revenues if you compare it against the current tax structure. That impact could be about $2.5 billion in 2018. Republicans say lower business taxes could generate higher economic activity the next 5 years, and that could create more state revenue than might be expected. But Democrats say these are effective tax cuts that will hurt state services.
We were promised a bill that would broaden the base. We were promised a bill that would lower the rate. We were promised a bill that would essentially be revenue neutral. The only thing we have here today is a piecemeal approach to what I understand will be tax reform.
This can cause us to grow in ways we haven't seen in this state. And it can bring in resources that we've never had available in this state to help those folks.
A final third vote on Senate tax reform is scheduled for early next week, but this week's 30-17 passage shows solid GOP support for the newly changed tax reform legislation.
Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger is here. Okay, 5 months I've tracked Senate tax reform. For 5 months there have been other senators running this bill. In the last couple of days, you took it over. Why are you now fronting this bill and it's quite different than what I remember seeing come out February, March, April?
We've said for a long time that one of the most important things that we need to do is enact comprehensive tax reform in North Carolina. We've got to do something to change the business climate in North Carolina. We're currently ranked 44th in the Tax Foundation's Business Tax Index rating. So we've got to do something substantial. The bills that had previously been introduced, I've worked with Senator Rucho on the bill that was introduced by Senator Rucho and Senator Rabin. That, in my view, was a comprehensive tax reform bill that was substantially the direction that we needed to go in. It was fairly clear that that concept was not going to be something that we were going to be able to pass. So it was important for us to look for a compromise of some sort that held true to the idea of comprehensive tax reform and yet was something that could be passed. And I believe this bill is that.
Would you call this bill comprehensive reform? I remember if you're going to get rid of the income tax, you do on the corporate income tax, but there was a talk of going consumption-based and all the wonks were bending your ear. Is this a heavy modification or is this true reform?
It's true reform because what you do is you, in addition to getting to a zero rate on the corporate, you also modify substantially the tax structure, the deductions, the exemptions, what some folks would call loopholes. You eliminate just about every one of those, and so you simplify the entire tax code, the individual income tax code, and you simplify the corporate tax code ultimately because you get the tax to zero. Nothing could be simpler than that.
Corporate tax rate of 0%. Progressives don't like that proposal. Conservatives, pro-business people love it. What will it do for North Carolina if you have a corporation or business and you pay 0%?
Well, the thing we need to look at is what is the kind of activity we can expect to see in North Carolina as a result of the passage of this bill. And what we know is that corporations and business people make decisions based on what's best for their shareholders or what's best for their customers. And what we know is that the Tax Foundation is telling us that passing this bill moves North Carolina from 44th in the nation in business tax climate to 6th in the nation in business tax climate. And so that's a substantial jump. And what that means is that we will be more attractive to those employers that we want to attract. And if you don't have employers, you will not have employees. And so what we want is something that will help us create jobs, and we believe this bill will help create jobs.
If you're the small mechanic, you're the, well, TV repair, if there's even such a thing anymore much, what does it mean for those small businesses?
Well, one of the concerns that a number of folks brought to us was the idea that we were going to, under some of the bills that had previously been introduced and the bill that had passed the House, was that we're going to force people to pay tax on something that they're not currently paying taxes on. And so that was really a major obstacle to the reform effort that we had worked on heretofore. And so what we do with this bill is we do not expand the sales tax to those small businesses. And what we do is for those small businesses, we reduce substantially their individual income tax. And North Carolina has at the present time the highest marginal income tax rate in the Southeast, 7.75%. This bill will get the individual income tax rate down to 5.25%. Makes no change whatsoever in terms of the rate of taxation on sales tax, and it really doesn't change those items that are subject to the sales tax, except one thing. It eliminates the sales tax on food at the local level.
I noticed that you're throwing that back on the county governments, though. They can, if I read correctly, tax food at the local level. Why give them that power?
Well, that's a local decision. They can make the decision as to whether or not they think it's appropriate to be taxing food. One of the things we heard loud and clear was that at state level, that's something that the people did not want us to do.
Senior citizens testifying to you, making out that they don't want to pay income taxes on their Social Security benefits. How does that work? Or does it work the way they say?
Well, I think, I'm not sure exactly what they've said. What I do know is that we have talked with representatives of the AARP. We've asked them to give us some examples of senior citizens who have questions about what this bill would do. We have looked at the examples they gave us and we've given those results. If there's someone who is receiving Social Security and Social Security is their sole source of income, they will not pay an income tax under this plan. The combination of how you calculate federal adjusted gross income, which is what you start from, and the zero tax bracket that is put in this bill makes it clear that if the sole source of income that someone has is Social Security, they will not pay any income tax at the state level.
With this compromise bill that you are now leading, is there any way to put the caucus, the Republican caucus, back together and make them feel good about this bill? They may accept it and go along as in respect for you as leader, but can you bring everybody together as one happy family on this?
It's my belief that anytime you accomplish something in the legislature That accomplishment requires a certain level of compromise. And I think in this case, what we've done is we've put together a bill that is a substantial compromise from where we started, from where I started. And it's a bill that's good for North Carolina, and it's going to be good for job creation for the people of North Carolina.
And parting question, at the end of this tax reform debate, if your bill goes as unamended and you reach $1.5 billion in what would be perceived as a tax cut, does that mean the bottom line of this state government will drop from around $21 billion right now back to $19, which would set you as a cut? Or are you slowing down what you think the government will grow by going ahead so that we'll see more modest growth?
The growth will be more modest. You will not see the total of the state budget drop by that much unless a future legislature determines that it wants to cut further. As far as the revenue picture is concerned, what we're looking at is a revenue picture that will continue to grow revenue just at a slower pace than under the current tax structure.
Senator Phil Berger, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
The Senate's midweek alteration of its tax overhaul plan sparked the resignation of Mecklenburg County Senator Bob Rucho as a Senate Finance Committee chairman. Senator Rucho sent a resignation letter to Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger acknowledging the fundamental disagreement over tax reform policy. Senator Berger, is reported, refused Senator Rucho's resignation. In other news from the legislature, that bill to repeal the Racial Justice Act and redefine execution procedure and restart capital punishment received final legislative approval this week. Supporters blamed the Racial Justice Act for stopping state capital punishment. That law allowed condemned inmates to appeal their death sentences on racial bias grounds. Most Democrats say this law was beginning to really work, but Republicans had campaigned to change execution laws, and they had the votes. The new capital punishment policies take effect immediately upon gubernatorial approval. The Senate passed a gun bill that came from the House a few weeks ago. That legislation will allow the legal concealed carry of handguns in public parks, restaurants, and bars. It increases penalties for adults who recklessly leave their guns accessible to children and makes handgun permit information confidential. People would also not need a permit to buy a handgun, but would still face background checks. The House holds this bill for a final review. The Senate Finance Committee is holding a bill creating a state law to ban illegal immigrants from possessing firearms. Supporters say federal law already forbids undocumented residents from possessing guns, and local law enforcement throughout North Carolina needs a state law so they can take action. The bill allows local law enforcers to seize weapons from illegal immigrants. The state version of the federal law would take effect this December 1st. The House and Senate sign off on legislation to allow payday lending's return to North Carolina. The bill will set a sliding interest rate scale capping at 30% using a scheduled loan payment plan for customers. It limits the ability of low-ranking military personnel to receive consumer loans and prevents lenders from chasing overdue loans of service members actively serving in war zones. Supporters say these loans will help people with low credit scores who are shut out of other lending options. The bill sits on Governor Pat McCrory's desk. The House and Senate reach a quick deal on legislation stopping pharmacies from waiving Medicaid drug copayments. Supporters of Senate Bill 137 say pharmacies will often waive the drug fee on Medicaid costs to build customer loyalty and recoup the lost revenue if these customers return to buy other merchandise. The Senate position is that the practice is warping the free market using government services and should be stopped. Pharmacies could receive limited exemptions for customers facing financial hardships. This law would take effect October 1st upon receiving the governor's approval. The House and Senate both approve of changing the Wake County School Board and its local elections. Some believe elections changes will boost Wake County voter turnout and improve board representation. But there are others who believe otherwise, believing state Republicans are simply meddling in local politics. House Republicans followed their Senate colleagues to pass legislation making fundamental changes to Wake County school districts and board elections. 2 regional board members would join the existing school board. The election dates would be shifted to minimize the voter apathy of an off-year election, and voters would vote for 2 board members instead of 1. That would begin in 2016.
One thing the bill does is move the elections from odd number years to November of even number years so that a maximum number of people will participate. I guess they could all participate.
House and Senate Democrats believe state GOP lawmakers are overreaching into local politics. They've not accepted this GOP argument that school board election changes would boost voter participation.
I'm in favor of greater turnout as well. I think we all are, but I just want to remind the members there's a reason that most school board districts across the state are on odd years, and that said they're not partisan. I guess that's the decision you each have to make yourself, whether you want an R or a D next to every single race we have.
Republicans say the nature of Wake County's school assignment policy means many children attend schools out of their home district, and that shuts their families out of selecting the school board member who actually represents their child's school.
And so they find it difficult to get responsive representation from the member where their child lives, or sometimes they find it hard to get responsive representation from the person who represents them.
Cumberland County Representative Marvin Lucas wondered why state lawmakers are discussing a local political matter.
I urge you to vote no on this, and if you don't vote no, I know that it's politics.
But state lawmakers on a party line vote did weigh in, voting 70-42 to approve the Wake County School Board election overhaul. When you're online this week, find us on Facebook at facebook.com/legweek. During the legislative week, you can find me active on Twitter. Our show's name is @LegWeekInReview, and our email address for your comments, legweek@unctv.org. That's the show for this week. Thanks so much for watching.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.